All right, so last time we left off with talking about the final challenge to philosophical ethics and its implications for developing an ethical theory in marketing. And that last challenge is psychological egoism. And just as sort of a recap, one of the things that I told you all was that the other two challenges, subjectivism and cultural relativism, seem to be true because when we look around and we ask people questions that are really difficult in terms of whether or not we feel or think certain ways about certain activities, like should we market certain drugs? One of the things that has become very popular in the contemporary era in the last, year or so is the marketing of GLP-1s, which are being marketed as a miracle drug for all kinds of things. These were designed largely to treat diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And what we've seen is that, as with a lot of drugs, they have side effects. And sometimes when we talk about side effects, those side effects can be positive or negative. And one of the positive side effects of GLP-1s was that they put them to use with diabetics to lower their A1C. And lo and behold, these people started to lose weight. Now, it turns out that if you're not diabetic, you lose even more weight on these GLP-1s because you are more receptive to the way they work. And so we now have this sort of miracle weight loss drug that's out there. And we're seeing a radical decrease for the first time in very modern history, in the weight problems that we have been seeing increase over the last 20-something odd years. And people are getting on them and they're losing all kinds of weight. And there are all kinds of positive benefits to that. We don't know necessarily what the long-term benefits or the long-term disadvantages of those drugs are going to be. And one of the reasons that I use these drugs as an example of psychological egoism is because if we talk about whether or not we should just market those drugs and put them out there and advertise them, we would have a lot of different opinions. And that's probably a drug that's less controversial than some of the others that we could think about, like RU486 or some of the other hormone therapies and things like that have become very controversial today. But it's still, ethicists would debate whether or not we should be prescribing these drugs, because isn't there something to the idea that maybe we shouldn't just rely on the idea that you can solve all of your problems with taking a pill or getting a shot and everything going away? So if we think about subjectivism, it seems true because we would all have different opinions about whether or not we should be allowed to market GLP-1s or hormone therapies for certain groups or classifications of people, or RU486, those kinds of things. And so it doesn't seem like we can come up with universal sort of agreements on these things, and that makes marketing very difficult. Or if we come up with agreements, it's agreements among cultures, which is what we call legal positivism. And so I talked about that last time. Now, this one doesn't seem right because, as I was saying last time, it seems like we do have free will. We all think that we do, but psychological egoists would say free will is illusory, that we don't necessarily have free will. And why is that? Well, they would say is probably more so a result of nature. We are programmed to behave, although it may be a combination of both nature and nurture, to behave in very predictable and specific ways. And we think that we are making choices, but not necessarily. And there's a guy named Martin Lindstrom who wrote a book, and I think I mentioned this before, Biology, Buiology, who does experiments. And we actually were doing some of these in my doctoral program at New Mexico State. They had gone in coordination with the psychology department, not psychiatry, the psychology department, and purchased an fMRI machine. And what Lindstrom does in biology is he uses things like the fMRI machine to determine whether or not we are reacting to certain marketing appeals. And historically, the way we determined whether or not people were reacting to marketing appeals was to ask them in survey research whether or not they liked a commercial or whether or not they had tried a product and how they felt about those products. And it turns out people are really notoriously bad about answering those surveys for a wide variety of reasons. But if we put them under things like fMRI machines and we watch what happens to the brain activity when they are shown marketing appeals, Lindstrom argues that we can predict with a great deal of certainty and success whether or not a product or service is going to be successful, or a television show. And so this seems to lend credence to this idea that maybe it's not all what we think of as being free will, right? And psychological egoists would say, look, we are hardwired to look out for our own best interests. That's just sort of innately hardwired, and we're always going to do that as a result of these urges that we have no control over. We think we do, but maybe we don't. And one of the examples that Lindstrom gives in this book called Biology is with smokers. Do we talk about this, the advertisements for smokers, or did I talk about this in my first class or my second class? I know I talked about this last week.
Probably a different class.
Okay, so Lindstrom in Biology takes a group of smokers, and I remember very distinctly when they started producing these ads, the anti-smoking ads that you have probably seen that were produced by a combination of the American Cancer Society. Let's see if I can find one of these ads. Here's one. This is not the best one that I can. That's not even one of the worst ones, that they showed the effects that smoking can have on individuals. So they play these ads for smokers, and then they ask them, they put them in the fMRI machine while they're playing these ads, and they look at the brainwave activity, and then they do these surveys and ask them, does this make you want to quit smoking? And everybody says, oh yes, I want to quit smoking. But the part of the brain that's firing when they're watching these ads, and there were lots of them, right? Was the part of the brain that senses pleasure, generally. So these smokers are seeing these ads, and they're actually wanting to go out and smoke. And Lindstrom argues that the ads are ineffective as a result. Like what the science seems to suggest is that these ads are not effective. Now, I took umbrage with this when I was in my doctoral program because we read this book and had to do a critique of it because the professor of the class that I was taking at the time wanted us to read literature that had been produced by practitioners of marketing as opposed to academics of marketing and try to find the flaws. And one of the flaws that I found with this is that I said, well, that may be true. He may be correct that it is causing these smokers who are watching these ads to want to go out and actually smoke, but that's not the intended target of the ad. He's misidentified the target population of the ad. The target population of the ad is not people who are already smokers, right? The target population of the ad is people who are not smokers yet. It's young people who are not smokers. You're trying to encourage these people because smoking has decreased in every population group over the years except one. What's that group? Your demographic, your age group and younger. And so you're trying to convince these people. What we need to do is we need to look at what those people's response to the ads are, rather than what the smoker's response to the ad is. But even having recognized that maybe he's misidentified the target population, we still have to deal with this idea of psychological egoism, which is, are we really predictable? And I told you I used to do an experiment in my class where I'd say everyone with a Y chromosome, raise your hand, and everybody who had a Y chromosome would raise their hand. And I'd say, why did you do that? You think you have free will? Well, you did it because you're programmed to do what your teacher tells you from a very early age. We start with this in kindergarten. Do what the teacher says. Line up. In line. Walk in line. How many of you remember this from elementary school? You walked, to the cafeteria in a single file line, so the hallways weren't chaos. I think they've stopped doing that, by the way, because I've gone to my nieces and nephews' elementary schools in recent years when they were in elementary school, and it just seems to be mass pandemonium anymore. There was a lot more. Of course, I went to a Roman Catholic school, so maybe that had something to do with it. There was a lot more discipline and, walking in a straight line and conforming than there seems to be in these places today. So psychological egoism says that we'll always act in our own self-interest, that we really can't help it. We think we have free will, but it's illusory. And it's not clear to me that they are not somewhat accurate in this. Why do I say this? Well, if we think about these things like wants, which is one of the things that we focus a lot in marketing, is wants and needs. That's one of the essential elements of marketing, is that you have people who want or need something. And we're going to satisfy that want or need. And if we think about this, we experience this every single day, where we deny ourselves maybe something that we want. And so we think that that is an example of an exercise in free will. Is it? You deny yourself things that you want all the time. I love shoes and jewelry and food. I have managed to lose 35 pounds over the last 4 months because I have a commercial pilot's license. I fly competitive aerobatics, and I was pushing the maximum weight limit of my airplane in terms of being able to do aerobatic maneuvers. So I want to eat constantly. I love it. I love food. But I needed to lose the weight because I was getting to the point where, dangerously close to the envelope on the weight and balance of the aircraft for certain maneuvers. Surely my denial of that desire is an example of free will. Well, for psychological egoists, they would say, no, you just want something more than you want food, which is the ability to continue to compete. But you didn't will yourself to want that either. Can you will yourself to not want something? Can you will yourself to not want something? You may deny yourself something. That's not the same thing as willing yourself to not want it. You may want something more. I like shoes and I like jewelry. I love watches. I have a nice watch collection. I would really love to have a Rolex, what they call the presidential. I don't think Rolex actually calls it that. It's called the day date. but everybody informally calls it the presidential. Maybe they do call it the presidential, I don't know. So the Rolex Presidential is solid gold or platinum. It has not just, my Rolex has the date, but not the day at the top of the watch. And I really want one. I've wanted one forever and ever and ever. I don't have one. Why don't I have one? That watch new is about $50,000 now. You can buy a previously owned one for about $20,000 now. So I don't have one. Why? Because I want my money more than I want that watch. But I didn't will myself to want the money. Did I? Not sure that you do. So it's not clear to me. This one is really difficult when you really start to think about it. It's really difficult to dispense with because you think you have free will, but I'm not sure that you do. Studies in modern psychiatry suggest that our ability to control stuff is far less than we think. You know, if you are a paranoid schizophrenic, you can't help but react the way you do to certain stimuli, which is almost everything. The things that I can come up with to challenge this idea that we don't have any free will are pretty limited, but I think they are worth considering. One is that, first of all, psychological egoists say that we always act in our own best self-interest. And if we look at people like the late Mother Teresa, who has, I believe, become a saint now, you would say, well, there's somebody who dedicated her entire life to helping the poor and sick in a very bad part of Calcutta. And psychological egoists would say, well, she's still looking out for her own self-interest, right? I mean, if you believe that good works, and there is a big split among theologians as to whether or not good works count, right? For the Calvinists, no amount of good works count towards the entrance into heaven. But a lot of religions believe that, you know, that's the ticket in to the afterlife. So really what she was doing, according to psychological egoists, is looking out for her. I mean, maybe she thought about this, that, you know, she really wants to make sure that she's on the right side of getting into heaven. So she's still acting selfishly. She's still acting in her own self-interest, according to psychological egoists. That's just what she wanted to do, because her ultimate goal is to have salvation. It becomes less clear when we think about when people are enormously conflicted. What do you do when you're enormously conflicted? A lot of times we have decisions that we have to make in which we're faced with the lesser of two evils. And so what do we do in those situations? Psychological egoism doesn't really tell us how you resolve that. So maybe there is still some ounce of free will. If you have two really bad or two really good decisions, two really good alternatives in a decision, it doesn't tell us how we go about solving those. If you want to do both things equally, how do you choose? Surely there's got to be an element of free will in that. Doesn't there? But I don't know. This one is the one that's really, really difficult to dispense with. The other two we can dispense with pretty easily. Yes, if we think about really difficult questions in ethics with regard to subjectivism, we will find a lot of disagreement. But If we think about less complex situations, we will find an enormous amount of agreement. And in fact, we can find at least three things that have held for all people in all societies, in all places, at all times, that are foundational to ethics. One, the three things that we can find among all groups and all people and all societies is that everybody agrees that the indiscriminate killing of a member of the in-group is a priori immoral. So I've given you this term before. A priori is knowledge that can be gained from the rational mind, like the Pythagorean theorem, as opposed to a posteriori, which is knowledge that has to be gained from experience. No society and no individual could survive if you allowed for the indiscriminate killing of members of the group. Now, plenty of societies throughout history have been perfectly fine with indiscriminate killing of members of the out group, those people over there, right? But no society could form if we just allowed for the indiscriminate killing. And the reason that we can know a priori that killing is probably wrong, at least the indiscriminate killing is probably wrong, is that, and we can know it a priori, we don't have to experience being murdered to know that we probably don't want to be murdered. In Candide, Voltaire talks about this. So if you want to read a very pithy kind of work of philosophy, you can read Candide. It's a novel. It's actually kind of an anti-novel. It's very thin. You can read it in one sitting. The book is named for the major character, Candide, who is a resident of, I think, Westphalia in the barony of Thunder Tantronx. Voltaire hated the German language, so he made fun of it by calling the baron Thunder Tantronx. And we're told that it's such a wonderful place, such a Garden of Eden, that the castle that the baron lives in even has a few windows and a door. And Candide falls in love with the baron's daughter, and he gets thrown out of this paradise, and he spends the rest of the book trying to get back with his beloved, whose name is Cunegonde, which is the baron's daughter. And they go through a lot of trials and tribulations to try and get back to each other. And at one point in time, they come across an old woman who's ugly and haggard. And it turns out that this old, ugly woman was the daughter of a pope. Now, popes are not supposed to have daughters. But she was. She was the daughter of a pope, and she was set to be married to a prince, and her life was going to be wonderful. But as she was sailing to meet the prince, she gets captured by a group of pirates. And as a result of a storm, they get shipwrecked. And in order to survive, they cut off half of her buttocks and eat it. And she then gets sold into slavery by these pirates. And she goes through all of these trials and tribulations. But anyways, at some point in the book, Cunegonde, Candide, and this old woman meet. And they're comparing war stories of all of the things that have happened to them. And the old woman concludes with, is there anything more idiotic than to constantly cling to something that we should probably want to throw off? But in all of the things that I endured and all of the things that I've suffered, I continue to love life. That's what she says. She says, in fact, in all of the trials and tribulations and travels that I've had, I've only known a handful of people that have ever taken their own life. People will live in the worst conditions imaginable and still cling to life. At the very end, lots of people still want extraordinary measures taken to save their own life, right? So we can know a priori that we don't want to be murdered. And in fact, we find that among every single society, there is a prohibition against the indiscriminate killing of a member of the in-group. We have criminalized this in the United States, right? And every other society has. And we've applied that not just to members of the in-group, but also to members of the out-group. So, for example, at the common law, murder was defined as one, the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. That's the elements of murder. At the state level, we now call this capital murder or first-degree murder. And every society has this. You can't kill at least members of the in-group with these kinds of things. Unlawful. So there's lawful killings. What's an example of a lawful killing?
Self-defense.
Self-defense. Yeah, you can have a duck. Self-defense is a lawful killing. If somebody breaks into your home and they threaten you or your family, we have the Make My Day law in Oklahoma, and you can kill them. Perfectly legal, right? What's another lawful killing? War, soldiers in war, you can have a duck. Yes, war is a lawful killing. We're not going to hold soldiers accountable for deaths in war. Now, there are rules in war as a result of the Geneva Convention, but that's a lawful killing. But we can't have indiscriminate killings, right? In order to form a society. We couldn't form a society if we just said anybody could. That goes back to the Hobbesian state of nature. It's this war of all against all, and we can't come together. So we can know this a priori. A second prohibition that you can find among all people in all societies, at all places, at all times, is a prohibition against bearing false witness against members of the in-group. You cannot lie about members of the in-group. Now, again, more primitive societies would say it's okay to do it to those people over there, members of the out-group. But you can't do it to members of the in-group. Why? Well, if we allowed for it, you couldn't have any faith in society that things would get done, that we would be able to cooperate in the confines of the society. And so there is a prohibition against this. Now, again, as we become more sophisticated, we now say that you can't do that. You can't lie about the Canadians, for example, right? And if you do, you might be held accountable for defamation if you lie about specific people, right? The third prohibition that we can find against all people in all communities at all times is a prohibition against stealing from members of the in-group. Now, lots of groups, again, it was perfectly acceptable to raid those members over there, those other people over there. It was acceptable to go on, the Vikings did this. Can't raid from your own people, though, right? So we have found at least some things that we can all agree on, and we are getting to the point where we are finding more and more things that we can all agree on are universals that we can hold true. Most countries, for example, in the world have adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that says that people have the right to have free thought and free conscience, and that slavery is immoral. So the challenges that we talked about with regard to ethics have three problems with them. They allow for extreme exceptions. Subjectivism allows me to say, I'm special, I am exempt from the rules, and so we can't form a universal code if we allow for that. Cultural relativism doesn't allow for the individual to say, I'm exceptional, but it does allow for the group to say, I'm exceptional. My group, my society is exceptional, and we can act differently. The second thing is that they're not based on reason, they're based on emotion. And as a result, because of these two, we can't develop universal principles of action or conduct. So what is a valid ethical theory? Well, it's based on rational analysis that allows, based on this rational analysis, this a priori thinking, this logical thought, it allows for the development of principles that we can then say are universally applicable. We can develop either methods or rules for dealing with things that are universally applicable. You can apply them irrespective of an individual's culture, personal feelings, or values, right? Not that values are unimportant, but you can develop these. So what is the first fully worked out system of philosophy that does this? Last time I told you, I think in the Western thought, it's found in Republic. This is the first fully worked out system of knowledge, conduct, governance that we see, and it's really well worked out in Republic by Plato, using his mentor Socrates as the protagonist in this work. So I think I told you starting last time that Socrates went around Athens and he was asking, sort of hard questions. And in Republic, we get a lot of answers to these hard questions. And I told you last time that one of the interlocutors that comes up very early in the discourse is this idea of might makes right. And we talked about this in this class, that you're going to take a test and you don't want to do that because it'll, interfere with going and hanging out with your buddies or coming to class, which interferes with sleep. We used to offer 7 a.m. classes here at UCO when I first started teaching 30-something odd years ago. And I used to teach those classes, 7 a.m. classes. I loved those classes because I get up at 5 a.m. every day. So I think that's just a perfect time to start the day, but nobody seems to think that anymore. We can't even offer 8 a.m. classes anymore because nobody will take them, because you all, like 9:30 seems to be the earliest that you're willing to recognize that the sun actually is high in the sky and that we need to start the day. So, I've tried to offer 8 a.m. classes. I did get one to make about a year ago, but it was only because it was a principles of marketing class, and it was the only Tuesday, Thursday face-to-face class, and it was offered only at 8 a.m. So it actually did make, but there was far more demand if we would have offered it at 9:30. So I used to offer these 7 a.m. classes. I liked those classes, right? And they were pleasant to teach because people who are up at 7 a.m. actually want to be up at 7 a.m. Whereas 9:30, 10 o'clock, it's like you're just sort of like paying homage to the fact that you had to get up. And why is it that you're here? Well, because you're going to follow the rules and you're going to do this because you want an A, or B or C or whatever it is that you want in this class so that you can add this to your transcript and get enough points to graduate, right? That's the goal for most of you. And so you're going to do things that you don't want to do because either I, as the professor, or the institution has the power to tell you that this is what you're going to do. This course used to be required for a degree in marketing. It's now an elective. It's one of the guided electives, but it used to be required. So if you wanted a degree in marketing or professional selling, you had to take this course. That was mandated by the institution. They've changed this. It's no longer mandated, but you have to get a certain number of credits. And so I imagine that's why some of you have taken this class, right? So you're going to do these things. So the first interlocutor that Socrates comes across says, well, might makes right. That's ethics. And again, this one's pretty easy to dispense with for Socrates because he says, yeah, that may be the way the world works. But is it the way the world works? So for example, one of the things in doing this, yeah, I'm going to tell you what you have to do, but it has to be within the confines of some rules. And I can't just decide, for example, that I don't like you and give you an F, can I? No. If I do that, if I just say, I just don't like you, I'm going to give you an F, what happens? Nobody knows.
You'll probably get fired.
Oh no, it's very hard to fire a tenured professor. Very hard to fire a tenured professor.
Complaints, at least. I don't know.
Complaints? Okay, maybe. You actually have the right to appeal that grade. There's something called a grade appeal. And when I was associate general counsel, I sat on all of the grade appeal committees as sort of the ALJ for the university. And students would plead their case. It was really interesting to me. Professors were always harder on other professors than they were on students. And students were always harder. So the committee is made up of 3 faculty members and 3 students. No, I'm sorry, 4 faculty members and 3 students, which seems lopsided. But it was amazing. Professors were always harder on other faculty members. They'd be like, well, it wasn't in the syllabus. Shouldn't have done that. I mean, I saw lots of students win grade appeals because they would be like, he said that this is how we would be graded, and then he changed his mind. Now, there were reasons that the faculty members usually did that, but if you put together a syllabus and you say, this is the way we're going to grade, and this is the rules of the game, it's the contract between you and I, you signed up for this class, and that tells you, you gotta you can't just add stuff to it. Well, you can, but there's a way you have to do it. You have to basically do it in writing and say, this is an amendment or an addendum to the syllabus. I never do that because it's problematic to do that because students get upset. If they start planning their semester and all of a sudden you say, oh, no, I'm gonna, insist that you're gonna do X, Y, and Z instead, people get upset. I think that's pretty normal human reaction. Like, I planned on this, and now you're giving me this. I was sold this. Why are you changing it, right? So Socrates dispenses with this one, and he wants to come up with the absolute concept of justice. And so somebody else comes up and says, well, justice is the application of giving everybody their due. This is what we call the deserts theory of ethics. Giving everybody their just deserts. Giving them what they are owed. This one is hard for Socrates to dispense with. Let's think about it in terms of this class. If you show up and you participate and you get your 7 ducks that you have to have throughout the semester, and you take the tests and you do well on the tests, and you do well on the group assignments, which next week we'll have the first week of group assignments. So next week you have class periods to meet in your groups and come up with a definition of justice in your group and some substantive examples of justice and business. And I had a student that was like, this professor knows nothing. He's asking about justice. Justice has nothing to do with marketing. And I don't know why I'm having to do this. Justice is Socrates' term for ethics, right? I mean, it's what is just. Justice is not just the Department of Justice filing murder charges against somebody who does the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. Justice is a greater sense of the word. What is the abstract reality of or the abstract, implications of individuals' actions within contexts in society and how we treat each other is also justice. So you're going to come up with this idea of justice, and in your groups, use AI, see what AI says. AI will come up with very superficial at this point definitions of justice that you should look at. And one of them that it'll probably come up with is this idea that you should give people what they deserve in marketing. If you pay for something, that's what you should get. If you pay for this class and you get it and you earn an A, that's what you should get. Does that seem fair? Nobody's going to respond. It doesn't seem fair to you?
No, I feel like you have to earn it.
You have to earn it, right? You show up, you pay for the class, you do the requirements, you can have a duck, but you earn the degree. Is there ever a time when giving people what they are owed would not be just? If you show up, you do this, you get the 7 ducks that you need to get, you do the group work, which you're going to do next week, you're going to meet in your classes, you have the class time to do that, you can meet in this room if you want to. You can meet in cyberspace. You can meet however you want. Teams. Somebody use Teams anymore?
Yes,
Why?
it's part of design program.
It's part of, okay. You can use Zoom. I thought everybody abandoned Teams in exchange for something that was better called Zoom. No? You don't think Zoom is better?
Doesn't it say you're present in Teams in the top right there?
Well, that's, I don't use Teams. I don't use it. When COVID happened, they wanted us all to use it, right? So that we could still meet synchronously with our classes. And I think that when you sign into the university, it just automatically, it pops up on the computer. I use Zoom.
You're a closeted Teams lover, I know it.
No. I like to use Zoom. If I just have one person, I'd rather do FaceTime than anything else. FaceTime is the most convenient, but if you have, I don't know, can you FaceTime with more than one person? I don't know if you can or not.
Yes.
You can? You can FaceTime with, oh wow, maybe I should just, use FaceTime. Because I have an iPhone.
You do.
Like that's the appropriate thing. So, well, let's see. Let's see if we can come up, I'll tell you the example that Socrates comes up with to dispense with this idea that justice is giving people what they deserve. Let's suppose, and for years and years and years, I would ask a couple of questions in my class, and I've kind of stopped asking them because nobody has this sort of shared reality that I had anymore. I would say, how many of you grew up on a farm or had family members that owned a farm or a ranch? I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. So I'll go ahead and ask the question. How many of you grew up on something that resembled a farm or a ranch? One person. When I started teaching here at UCO 30 years ago, every hand in the room would go up. Because even if they didn't grow up on a farm or a cattle ranch or some kind of ranch themselves, they had a grandparent who did, that owned a farm. So why is it that you have this unique experience among your peer group here?
Not from the area. I'm from like 2 hours south, where there's only farms really.
Okay, where's 2 hours south of
Ardmore.
Ardmore?
Mhm.
There's a town in Ardmore.
It's mainly a farming town where I'm from, at least. I'm not from like, the part I'm from is Springer. It's right outside of Ardmore, but most people.
There's a
don't know
prison
where
there.
it's at. Huh?
Isn't there a prison there in Springer?
Not that I know
I
of.
believe there is.
It is, it's
A
pretty
female
small.
correctional facility, I think, is in Springer.
That might be right. I don't know.
I
It's a
think
really
Maple
small
Bassett.
town. There's like a high school, a post office, and a gas station out there, and that's really about it.
Let's see, I think I'm right on that. I may be wrong. Let's, Maple Bassett. Maple Bassett Correctional, no, it's in McLeod.
Okay, I
Sorry.
was gonna say, I didn't think so, but you know.
I got that wrong. Okay, so you grew up in this little small town
Mhm.
of Springer,
Mhm.
which is outside of Ardmore.
Mhm.
And what kind of agriculture did your family engage in?
Mainly chickens. We grow our own crops as well. We have horses and a few goats.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I'll get a cow, raise it up and butcher it. That's about it.
Okay, were you part of FFA?
Yes.
All right, that's an unusual experience. So I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. And one of the things that most of the people that were like me that grew up on this experienced was we tended to be hunters, right? If you have a lot of land and you have guns, because everybody has a gun. If you grow up in the country for some reason, you were a hunter. So do you hunt?
A few times whenever I was younger, but I haven't here recently.
All right. That's also unusual. So I'll ask how many of you have ever hunted in here, and almost nobody has experienced this. But again, 30 years ago when I started, every hand would go up and people would say, yeah, I duck hunt, quail hunt, whatever, hunt. And they'd had some experience with this. Well, so let's suppose you are a hunter and you have a friend who loans you a rifle to go hunting with. You should give that rifle back to your friend, right?
Yeah.
When the friend comes and says, I want my rifle back, you should give that rifle back to him, right? What if that friend comes back and they are under the influence of something, you know, since Oklahoma legalized the marijuana, we'll say that they're under the influence of marijuana because they've gotten a bad grade in Dr. Missy Graham's business communications class, and they're talking, I won't use myself as an example here. They're talking about climbing the tower of Old North and shooting her when she walks between the business building and the administration building on Friday afternoons to drop off paperwork because she's the department chair. Should you give them that rifle back?
No.
Why not? It's theirs. They own it. It's their property. Should you give it to them? That's their due. Are you all communists? That's an extreme example, but it's one. So what Socrates wants to find is the absolute concept of justice. And he says, if we can find one exception, that's not the absolute concept of justice. Giving people what they deserve is not always going to work in all places. You can't always give people what they deserve because they may be psychotic at the time and incapable of rational thought. And we shouldn't give dangerous weapons, even though under a purely deserts theory, it's theirs. They own it. It's their property. They have a right to it. But most of us would say, no, don't give them the weapon back. You know, until they've at least come off of whatever it is that they're on and are more rational. And then maybe you should make sure, right? So we did this experiment the first week where I asked you what this is, and some of you said that it was a table, and I don't think it's a table. I think it's a desk because we're not eating at it. And we came up with this. So what is it that Socrates says? So they finally get tired. These interlocutors kind of get tired of Socrates making fun of them and picking holes in their arguments. And they say, well, why don't you tell us what justice is? And Socrates then asks a bunch more questions, and it's a rather thick tome, but you can read it fairly quickly. And one of the concepts he comes up with is, he said, well, okay, let's think about this. If we study a polis is the individual writ large. A community is the collectives of individuals, and so it's a bigger unit of study. And maybe if what we look at a polis, we can figure out what is just for the individual. We can look at a bigger example. And so he then comes up with the allegory of the cave, and you'll get to see that I'm not much of an artist. This is one of the best allegories in all of literature. You should read it for yourself. I'll try to do justice to it, and you'll see my exceedingly poor representation of the cave. So let's suppose you have a cave, and there's this back wall back here. There's an entrance to the cave, and over here outside the cave is the sun, right? And you have these people that are born and raised in the cave, and they're positioned in such a way that they can't really see each other, but what they can see is they can see this far wall over here. And somewhere behind them, again, you'll get to see my wonderful drawing skills, is a big fire, right? And between the people and this fire, the captors in the cave walk back and forth, and they carry things in front of the fire, and it projects images, again, onto this wall that the prisoners in the cave can see. Now, for somebody who is born and raised in this cave, they're going to think that reality is what they see on this wall. That's going to be reality. But that's not reality, is it? That's the illusion of reality. It is the projection of something else that itself may be real, but these images are not real. They're shadows on the wall. They're not the thing itself. Now let's suppose that one of these individuals is forced out of his position, and he is made to turn around that way. He's going to come to the realization that everything he or she thought before is this illusion. And let's suppose that not only is he forced to face the fire, but now he's forced out of the cave. And initially, what's going to happen is, because this individual has been raised in a cave, the lighting is dim, right? If you've gone through these cave tours, you can go through them. Missouri is something like the cave state, I think is what they call it, because there are more caves that you can tour in Missouri than almost any other state in the Union. If you've gone to Silver Dollar City sprang up as a result of a cave tour. That's the way it got started, was they sold, tours. These two sisters would take you down in a ladder, by the way. It's kind of frightening. The way you enter this cave, you go through the gift shop of Silver Dollar City, and off to the side, a lot of people don't even realize that it's there. They go to Silver Dollar City and don't realize that this is the origin. You can go through this cave. They limit it to 45 people, but you go in the cave and there's all this wonderful stuff that you get to see, and you learn the history of the cave. And so you come out of the cave and it's really, really bright. In fact, creatures that are born and raised in caves oftentimes have lost their sight completely. There are these little fish and salamanders and things like that that live in caves in Missouri, and they tend to be blind because they don't need sight, because they're living in darkness. They have other senses that take over. So you're going to realize that everything you knew before was an illusion, and you're going to see literally the light, right? And you will become enlightened and recognize that everything was an illusion. Now, the reason Socrates talks about this is because when we come up with this concept of justice, justice is very abstract. So as you think about your response and as you use AI, a lot of times what you will come up with and what the AI will come up with is things like fairness. Justice is being fair. That's something that you all want in this classroom. You want me to be fair to you. You'll say that. Students, when they get their grades and they're not happy with it, they'll be like, it's not fair. I've heard this a lot in the past. I don't think you're being fair. Well, why do you think I'm not being fair? Did I follow the syllabus? Okay. Then how am I not being fair? Well, I'm special. No. Sorry. That's not fair. But what is fairness? So a lot of times we use these terms interchangeably. Justice is fairness. What's fair? How should I determine what is fair? In here. Let's suppose that I have a supply, a bag, a package, whatever, of very special cookies. These cookies not only taste good, but they're good for you. They're healthy cookies. Great tasting, tons of fiber, lots of protein. I can tell you I've tried every single one of these that, as somebody who's, worked out for most of my life because I have a tendency to be fat. And so I go to the gym. I used to run until I broke my hip. I can't do that anymore. So I walk, I try to get over 10,000 steps a day so that I can stay thin. It's a struggle for me. I've tried they always come out with these, like, when I first started working out, when I was in high school, they came out with these things called power bars, which were supposed to be just like amazing. How many of you, they still make them. You get to the point where you can tolerate them. They've got a lot of fiber and protein, mostly made with peanut butter, I think, but they're kind of gritty and awful. But let's suppose I actually have a good cookie that has got lots of protein and fiber and all these vitamins and minerals. How should I distribute those cookies in this class? How should I distribute the cookies in this class?
You can do it like the ducks, like if you participate, you get a cookie.
Okay, you can have a duck for that response. If you participate, you get a cookie. If you put forth the effort, I will give you the cookie. Now remember, these are special cookies. They're magic cookies. They both taste good and they're good for you. My grandmother, when I would struggle to lose weight, would say, you know, if it tastes good, spit it out. That's how you know you shouldn't be eating it. I drink black coffee because when I started drinking, I was a little kid when I started drinking coffee. And I'd go with my grandmother. She'd walk every morning with her best friend, and they'd walk in Albuquerque to the Village Inn, and they would have coffee and breakfast. And I said, well, I'll have some coffee. I was like 6 or 7 years old. And she's like, okay. And I ordered the coffee and I started to put sugar and cream. She's like, no, you'll get fat. Black, you can drink it black. And so from the time I was 6 to now, I drink coffee black. It's the only way I like it. I don't want anything in it because I just got used to it. Tastes pretty good. You know, if you don't know any different, it's okay. So these are healthy cookies and they taste good. So you're saying, but if I'm like denying people these cookies because they don't participate, which is hard. Like, you know, I tell you, you have to get 7 ducks in here, and there are those of you that just will not get a duck. I don't know what it is. This semester, like every semester I have students that just refuse. They're like, I'm absolutely not going to do class participation. Okay, it's to your detriment. Like, this is business, got to talk, kind of important. They just absolutely refuse. We'll see if I can actually have a semester where everybody gets a duck at least, you know, but I have semesters where nobody gets a duck. So should I deny somebody a cookie because they don't talk? Because they have agoraphobia and are shy? Or should I give them a cookie anyway?
You should offer it.
I should offer it.
Yeah, offer
Well,
it to those who do want it and those who.
Okay, you can have a duck for that, but are you a communist? Like, they're not working for these cookies, right?
I was gonna say you could offer like something in place of talking, like.
Okay, you can text me.
This assignment, I don't know.
You can text me. During COVID, I did that. You know, we would be partially in class and then partially in teams, I guess. I don't know. And I, you know, in order to get class participation, I'd be like, okay, here's my cell phone number. You can text. And I'd sit here and I'd watch the phone and see who was going to text me. We could have equality of results. Is that fair? Everybody gets a cookie. I'll give everybody a cookie. Well, let's think about that in terms of grades. Rather than cookies, let's say I'll give everybody the same grade. I'll give everybody in here an F. My colleagues would be happy with that because it would lower my GPA. They think I have too high of a GPA. And if I gave all of you an F, that would take care of me. And it would be treating all of you absolutely equally. Anybody want to go for that plan? No. Why not? Again, that doesn't seem fair, does it? If you come to class, you show up, you participate, you do the exercises, and I give everybody the same F, does that seem fair? No. What if I did it in the other extreme? What if I said, okay, I'll just give everybody an A? Does that seem fair? You don't think so? Why?
Because not everybody is working towards it. And I think it is fair to only give cookies to people that participate.
Okay, so you can have a duck. So you want me to only give things to people who earn them, which again goes to the desserts theory of justice. And that works a lot of the time. The desserts theory works a lot of the time, right? It works most of the time, probably. What you want, I think, is equality of opportunity, not equality of results. And there's a difference there, right? There's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of results. Equality of results is I'm treating everybody absolutely fairly, I guess, either A or F, or everybody gets a cookie. And we do this like when you're in kindergarten, like they tell you if you have a birthday, I never got to do this because my birthday was supposed to be July 4th, but it was July 1st because my mother got annoyed with my father's family. And so when they left to go watch my brother and my uncle, her brother-in-law play, he was playing football for the University of New Mexico. And they had a scrimmage game and everybody thought that they had time to go watch a scrimmage, which was on July 1st because my due date was July 4th. They should know that like due dates are flexible creatures. They don't necessarily happen, but my mother was like, I'm having the baby now because she wanted to deny my father's mother the opportunity to be there for the blessed event, which was my birth. So I was born on July 1st. I was supposed to be born on July 4th. I'm still bitter about that because almost everybody in my family, my aunt was born on December 31st, which is New Year's Eve. My mother was born on October 31st, which is Halloween. My dad was born on Thanksgiving. So every 7 years, his birthday falls. This year it will be on Thanksgiving. He turns 90 this year. It'll be on Thanksgiving Day. So everybody in my family has these, like great birthdays except me. July 1st. I missed it by 3 days, right? So I never got to bring cookies to school for my birthday because my birthday was in the summer, but my friends who had birthdays that fell in September and October and November and December and January and February and March and April and May got to bring cookies. And we would have a class party or they would bring cupcakes. That was a big one, cupcakes. And the teacher would always say, if you bring cupcakes, you have to bring one for everyone, right? You have to have enough cake for everyone because you're taught this in kindergarten, sharing is caring. Aren't you? Do you all remember this? That little sharing is caring. You got to share, learn to play nicely with others. That's different than equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity is if you participate and you get a duck, you get a cookie, right? So what is equality of opportunity? Well, it's everybody has the same level playing field. I'm not going to judge one of you harsher because I don't like you for whatever arbitrary and capricious reason I can come up with in my own little mind to decide that I don't like you. Now, what all this highlights is that it's really hard when we talk about these abstract concepts like fairness and justice to come up with specific definitions. And that's what Socrates does. I think he sort of punts. He says, look, these concepts, like what is this? Is this a table or a desk? There is an absolute concept of a table or a desk somewhere. In the realm of the forms, there's an idealized, this is an imitation of a table or a desk. There is an absolute concept of a desk or a table in the realm of the forms. And the philosopher is the person who is like the individual who's drug out of the cave and is forced to see the light. He or she will be able to see things clearly. They will understand the absolute essence of justice. Based on this, and the reason the book is called Republic is because Socrates comes up with a republic. He says, look, if we can decide what's good for the community, we can decide what's good for the individual. The community is just the individual writ large. And so what we come up with from this idea in Republic is that we're going to come up with a republic, and it's going to be headed, the republic is going to be headed by a philosopher king. Now, what is a republic? In the ancient sense of the word, in the modern sense of the word, what political scientists describe as a republic is a representative democracy. That's not what republic meant in the ancient sense. Republicanism, in the ancient sense of the word, was made up of three things. It had an element of monarchy, an element of aristocracy, and an element of what they called polity, which we would call, mass participation I won't call it democracy because we'll talk about that in a minute. It had these three elements. So in this republic that Socrates comes up with, there's a philosopher king who's the head. Then there is the aristocracy, which are the guardians. These are the men of gold. Then you have everybody else that goes down from that, men of silver, men of bronze. And in this republic, you can get the essence of communism, by the way, from republic, because what it is everybody's going to contribute to the society in the role into which they are most suited. Not everybody's going to think really deeply about these concepts of justice. That's the philosopher king. And then you have the people that are pretty bright, but are not the philosopher king, maybe, that are going to be the thinkers. And then you have, the people that are men of silver, who are, going to be the industrialists, and then men of bronze, the people who are going to be workers in this society. That's a republic. You have these elements of monarchy, elements of aristocracy, and elements of mass participation or polity. And the three elements combined together allow for a high functioning. And in this idealized republic, what you're going to have is you're going to have very defined roles based on where you are and your abilities to contribute to the society, which is why you can tease out the elements of communism from republic. That's justice for Socrates. For most of us, that's pretty abstract, and trying to think about this is really, really hard in a class like this when we're talking about business. And so I turn to my favorite classical philosopher, which is Aristotle. So Socrates had a very famous student, which is the way we know about him, which is Plato, who wrote down what he said or wrote down his ideas. And then Plato had a very famous student whose name was Aristotle, who comes up with a different idea. And Aristotle never completely breaks with the philosophy that he's taught by Plato, but he does see things differently. So Aristotle was, by training, a physician and a biologist. And I think there's an enormous amount that we can gain as marketers from Aristotelian philosophy. Aristotle said, in studying 350 Greek polis, he sort of breaks with, he doesn't say that Socrates and Plato are completely wrong in this idea of justice, but he says, look, I went out and I looked at about 350 polis, which are Greek city-states, and there's lots of variation in these. A recent movie has come out about the Greeks. What's that movie? It's a big blockbuster that came out this summer.
The Odyssey.
The Odyssey, right? Which is half of the Homeric epic poems that deal with, sort of the wars that were going on in classical times, right? How many of you have seen the Odyssey? You went to see it? You could actually stay still long enough to go. I mean, isn't it something like 2.5 or
It was-
3,
yeah, it
3
was-
hours long?
Almost 3, yeah.
3 hours long, and there's no intermission, right? In the olden days, when I was a kid growing up, if you had a movie that was 3 hours long, you had an intermission. There was no intermission, right? Just 3 hours at the movie theater.
Yeah.
I don't know how anybody sits through 3 hours. Was it good?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I mean, I got a little bored, but it was, objectively, it was pretty good.
Okay. All right. So Aristotle looks at these 350 Greek polis, and there's the Odyssey's details. That's the Odyssey and the Iliad. The Odyssey and the Iliad are, one is going to war and the other's the adventurers coming back from war, right? And so he says, Sparta is different than Athens, which is where Socrates and Aristotle and Plato were. There are, according to Aristotle, governments of one, governments of a few, and governments of many. And there are good governments and bad governments of these types. And I'm running out of time, so we'll stop with that exercise and we'll pick up, but you're gonna start, based on what we've talked about so far, asking AI, coming up with definitions, and then telling me why I don't wanna give these to, one of my students actually bought, because I'm constantly complaining about the markers, actually bought the markers. Coming up with a definition of justice that we're then gonna like talk about some of these things and see what we can come up with based on what you come up with next time, and we'll talk about that. If you got ducks, come and see me.